Welcome to Built for This. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. My podcast features captivating conversations with intriguing people who have found purpose in their lives through their career, family, or life experiences, and just why they were built for this. Through the stories that you will hear, I trust that you will be inspired and encouraged to find just what you were built for. So let's get started. And welcome again to another episode of Built for This. And it's going to be a fun discussion here today. My guest is a former Fortune 10 executive, left the corporate America, now helping people find their path and their joy and their purpose in their work style. He's an author, a speaker, a coach, and I'm very happy to have him on the show today. But Kyle McDowell is my guest. And Kyle, thanks for jumping in on the show today.
Hey, Brian. What a pleasure to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Let's just start, my pleasure. Let's just start right back with before you're doing what you're doing right now. And like so many of us, you come out of school and we're all looking for our path and our journey, but you jump into corporate America. And what was that like? How did your career first start before you started doing what you're doing right now? And we're going to talk a lot about that.
Excuse me. From very, very humble beginnings. So I applied for a role at a regional bank inside of their call center when I was 17.
Wow.
And I rolled the dice that my birthday would come in between an interview, if I were even lucky enough to get an interview and a job offer. So I applied when I was 17, I think in like May or June. I got an interview in August. My interview was in early July. My birthday, I turned 18 after the interview, but of course I didn't want to tell them I was not of legal age yet. So by the time the job offer came, I was old enough to actually work.
Sure.
I mean, prior to that, I'd bagged groceries and mowed lawns for years. But so that was my kind of entry point into the corporate world. And man, from there, I found myself kind of checking all these boxes that I had created for myself to create, what I thought was the ideal career. But most of them were frankly based in vanity type things like, what's my title going to be?
Yeah.
How many people can I lead? Like, what's the biggest organization? Like, I wanted to run big things. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I was always drawn to operations. And fast forward, throughout a handful of different stops throughout my career, 30 years later, I was leading tens of thousands of employees. I was responsible for multi-billion-dollar P&Ls, operations around the world. And I will say this, Brian, the only thing that matched kind of those success criteria, if you will, and I do that in air quotes because we all define success differently.
Right.
But the only thing that matched kind of the climb up that ladder was the level of apathy that I felt inside. And I don't think I'm unusual in that. My point is that I started to care a whole hell of a lot less about the work that I was doing as each year passed, finally to the point where the apathy became so strong. I was on the doorstep of a divorce. I was in not great health. I wasn't really a very fun person to be around. And it just forced me to do a lot of self-reflection and wondering, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And if I am I doing it in a way that I can be proud of and create some type of legacy that those I was lucky enough to work with and alongside, that I had an impact on them greater than just kind of a boss-employee relationship. And it was through that period of self-reflection where I realized I was not the leader I wanted to be. I wasn't the person I wanted to be. And because I had this corporate identity, and then the Kyle outside of the corporate world was, pretty wildly different. Not a bad person, just different, because I felt as if I had to put this facade on inside the corporate world to, I had to be the smartest guy in the room, have the best, the most expansive vocabulary. My jokes had to be the funniest, those kinds of things. But, that's the environment I was raised in, the corporate world. And I don't think that's unusual. A lot of us kind of came up that way. But I made a promise to myself at this point in my career, and it was probably like year 22, that if I wanted something different, I had to do something different. So I actually took a really risky move and left corporate America. And I was not in a position to retire, Brian. I wasn't independently wealthy. I had to work, but I could take maybe a month or so off. And I was out of work for about 2 weeks and was asked if I would participate in some conversations to take on a role that would require me to lead about 15,000 people across the country. And it was a $7 billion program. And I could tell from the onset during the interview process, there was an opportunity to lead a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
I felt as if lots of really smart people, lots of people really committed to the cause, but there was a lot of dysfunction. There were a lot of silo operations. There wasn't a lot of team kind of. There wasn't much of a team orientation,
Yeah.
and that kind of excited me.
Yeah.
And then for me, the icing on the cake that compelled me to join this company, where my life wildly changed, because I led differently. And but the final straw for me was I sensed that my boss, the person to whom I would report, good guy, but seemed a little disconnected from the operation, which told me that there was a chance for me to really kind of lead in a way that might be uncomfortable at times, but also give me the kind of bandwidth and the latitude to do what I needed to do, even as I kind of stumbled my way through it. And that was where I created these principles that are they've changed my life. They changed how I lead, and they're the foundation for my book that you mentioned. It's a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller called "Begin with We," and it's kind of the primary source to learn more about the principles that I have found that reconnect us with the value that we once wanted to deliver when we first entered our work lives, reconnect us with the passion to have an impact, reconnect us with all of those things that I think we all bring to the workplace, but over time, for any number of reasons, kind of get sucked out of us throughout the career.
And I mean, our viewers, if you're those that are watching on YouTube, can see in the background there your book, "The Begin with We," and it's the 10 principles for building and sustaining a culture of excellence. You mentioned apathy, and I think in all of us, if we, no matter what our jobs are, over a period of time, that is a bit of a risk that can kind of creep into our day to day attitude or mentality, no matter what the workflow is. And once that happens, how did you see that? You kind of touched on it already, that it affected you physically, personally, family-like. But if apathy in the workplace has a chance to grab a foothold, it seems like it does obviously take away from the opportunity of excellence.
Yeah, man. For me, it was a slow drip,
Mm.
and it started with it wasn't. I can't think of like one sentinel moment that set the whole thing off for me, but I just remember seeing people that are really respected in very, very senior leadership positions behaving one way and one with one audience in front of them, and behaving very, very differently
Yeah.
in front of a different group. So kind of catering their message, their style, their behavior to what they thought would suit them best. You know, the quickest way to describe it is inauthenticity, and that's what I
Hmm.
saw. And that's what I perpetuated. Like I was a product of the environment where it was not uncommon for the boss to bang their fist on the desk or raise their voice, and it's just a different world, different environment in those days. And but it pushed me so far where I actually began to loathe the environments that I was responsible for creating, which is a real gut punch. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a hard pill to swallow, but I'm convinced that, and it's not theoretical or academic, because I've seen it and I'm living it now, and I
Hmm.
lived it for another decade, not quite, but almost a decade inside of the corporate world before I left to do what I do now, because it works. But the apathy is, I'm not even sure if you were to ask many people in the corporate space, and by the way, I define corporate as it's your job. Like it
Yeah.
could be a team of 10, it could be a team of 10,000, but
Sure.
it's what you do for a living.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask many folks, to describe their level of apathy, or if even they've even considered that they are apathetic towards their work environment, most would probably say no, and which is really pause for reflection, because they're so kind of heads down on this hamster wheel
Hmm.
that they haven't taken the time to even recognize that apathy is what they're feeling, and it's more apathy than it is. They're mistaking routine for apathy, or
Yeah.
vice versa. My point is if we don't take the time to genuinely self-reflect, am I having the impact that I am meant to have? And if you're not focused on impact, am I operating at a place where my highest and best use of skills and my capabilities are being relied on, and they're appreciated, and they're recognized? And for those that can't answer those questions affirmatively because you have obligations, you have to keep your head down because this is the world that you're in, and you got bills to pay. I got nothing but love for you. I respect that.
Hmm.
But I just think if we're more purposeful about how we spend what amounts to be about 100,000 hours of our lifetime in this thing called work, without some serious self-reflection, is it going the way it should be going? Am I doing the best and most that I can? Am I helping others? Am I, whatever your success criteria boxes are, it'll never happen if you don't think about it and focus on it more than not.
What about companies or leaders that are really stuck? And I'm sure you see this so much when you go out to speak or to coach, that are stuck in the quote old school way of doing things. This is the way we've always done it. It's the way our ancestors have done it. We've always run a business like this.
Yeah.
But ever since I don't know, maybe perhaps the COVID years, when all of a sudden we all became aware of remote working and a different viewpoint of where the worker was going to bring to the job and what the expectations were. How do you meet those challenges from a corporate leader or company leader when they're so stuck into maybe this is the way we should do it, and what helps open their eyes to the change that you think they need to have?
First of all, the premise of your question could not be more accurate. For decades, if not centuries, the employer was the one that says, take it or leave it. These are the rules.
Yeah.
You're lucky to be here. But you're absolutely right with the proliferation for work at home being what it is. That paradigm has shifted dramatically in that the employee has so much more say in the work environment, because they can walk and they can walk around the continent to another continent or around the globe, but still be in their home, because there's so many more opportunities just by definition, because we're not confined to zip codes any longer the way we used to be.
Right.
And I think with that shift, we're seeing things like workplace engagement, as defined by people like Gallup, workplace satisfaction. Likewise, also, Gallup puts out this thing called the State of the Global Workplace Survey every single year, and they ask questions like, did you experience these negative emotions a lot of the day yesterday? And it's things like sadness and worry and anger, and the respondents who say, yeah, I felt that emotion a lot of the day yesterday, is mind-blowing, man.
Yeah.
But what happens inside most organizations where I've seen it kind of be perpetuated to no end and actually participated in it, and I'm sure every single person who's listening to us or watching this conversation has seen this as well. So Brian, let's just pretend you and I are on a team of 10. We're peers on a team. You and I, we're buds. We get lunch together every now and then. Maybe we're even social every now and then. You and I have one thing in common, and that's the guy that we report to is a jerk. And we do not appreciate the way he treats us, the way he talks to us. He's our boss, but he's not a leader. Well, for whatever reason, those higher than him in the organization have seen some value that we haven't seen, and they promoted that gentleman. He's now moving on up, which means, but they've asked him before he takes the next role, he's got to identify his backfill.
Yeah.
And of course, you and I, we're ambitious dudes. We want to do a lot, right?
Sure.
So we raise our hand, we go through the application process, and you know who the interview's with? It's with this fella that we both agreed that we're not fans of. And more often than not, and it's human nature, and I get it because I've done it and I've watched it, we will take on the characteristics and the behavioral traits of that gentleman that we've loathed and made fun of and talked behind his back for years now, because we want to endear ourselves to him, because he's the guy that's making this decision to up our income, maybe give us a sexier title, going to help us along our path. And we recognize that, kind of to fit in, we got to get in, and we got to get in with this fella. So it repeats.
Yeah.
So, and we're not just doing it for show. We're doing it because we know it is what's, whether implied or even said directly, we do it because we know what works inside this company. We watch this jerk of a boss get promoted, and our best shot of doing the same thing to better our, families' lives and our well-being is to follow that game. So the cycle never ends until someone just says enough. But it's really scary to say enough. It's really scary to step out and lead in a way that's contrary to what you're seeing around you, because it's unfamiliar and at times it feels awkward, but it has to happen for change to take place.
I'd like to explore a little bit more about the employee's impact on their work environment and culture that you're talking about. And you touched on how that dynamic has changed over the last few years. And I've noticed as well that, when you're seeing perhaps more of a younger generation when they're looking for their next job, one of the biggest elements of importance to them is what is the workplace atmosphere like? What's the
Yeah.
culture like? What's those kind of things like, more so than maybe even what the pay is or what the
Mhm.
job description might
That's
be.
a fact.
Can you talk about how that dynamic has become or has elevated for a company leader to take that into account now at a larger expectation than perhaps what they've had in the past?
Right. Love that question. And before I have to give a caveat before my
Sure.
answer. And the
Yeah.
caveat is this: when we talk about work environment, at least when I'm talking about it, I'm not talking about perks. I'm not talking about
Yeah.
ping pong tables and ice cream Fridays. And I'm not talking about that
Mhm.
because those I think are fleeting. And at the end of the day, I just don't think they add value in ways that a different leadership paradigm does.
Mhm.
So here's the answer to, with caveat stated. Um, I believe it is absolutely 100% on the employer, the leaders within that organization, to be really focused on the work environment in a way that goes beyond the job description. It goes beyond the widget or service that we are producing.
Mhm.
And I recognize there are people that can hear that and say, "Well, I run a coffee shop. So how do I get a barista to buy into something bigger than serving a cup of coffee or a Danish?" And here's where I think those that are successful in creating that type of environment get versus those that do not is they recognize what I would describe as the ABCs of the employee value proposition. It's just a little way that I keep in mind
Mhm.
and how I try to remind leaders what their obligation is on this front. Every single one of us, regardless of our title, our seniority, our rank, how much money we make, I think we all want to add value. That's the A. Of course, there are exceptions, but more often than not, 99% in my mind, they want to add value.
Right. Sure.
And the B is we want to be valued. We want to be recognized for a job well done. We want to be, and that can come in any number of ways. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be, it can come in any number of ways.
Mhm.
But if we're adding value, we need to be recognized for that value, and that could be as simple as a pat on the back. Man, I see what you did, Brian. I saw the awe that you put in that customer's eyes. Man, I saw you go above and beyond. I appreciate that. That's helpful. Thank you. I think we all need that. And then the C is it's the leader's responsibility to connect the value that I've delivered as the employee to something bigger. And
Yeah.
that could also mean any number of things, but it always is rooted in what that employee is, what their goals, desires, where they want to be. So for an example, back to that barista scenario, if I'm living these ABCs and I want to connect the value that Sally, the barista, is bringing to the table with something bigger, I have to know Sally, and I have to figure out what's next for her. Does she want to open her own coffee shop?
Mhm.
Is she only here to pay her bills to get through school? Whatever the scenario is, her why at that moment. That's what we need to understand and recognize that Sally's not going to work with us for 100 years. She has other bigger aspirations. Well, get this, if she performs really well within our coffee shop, she's adding value and having an impact, and I appreciate her for what she's doing. And I am also going to be invested in how she makes the next step to whatever it is she wants to do next, including leaving us.
Mhm.
Because here's the thing, Brian, if Sally understands that I'm invested in her growth more than just slinging a cup of coffee across the counter, so much so that I care about her about the things that she wants to do next, including leave us, and I
Mhm.
invest my time, energy, and care into her during that process, she's not going to work less hard. She's going to be more committed and take more ownership of this role because she recognized the connection that we've had and the importance of the role that she's in today and the step that it is implying that she'll take on whatever that next step or path for her is. So I think it's incumbent on leaders to listen to or to lead in this way with the end result always being in mind. If we manage to results, we might get results. But if we manage the people and lead the people and inspire and motivate the people to deliver the results, we'll also get the results, but we'll also make connections that transcend the employee-employer relationship, and everybody benefits from that. And that's the legacy that I think we should all kind of think about as leaders.
And that's brought up now 2 points I want to ask you about. We talk about people. I'll get to that in a moment, but back on the employee perspective, and you were alluding to all of this. When an employee looks at a company where they want to be, what they want to be a part of,
Mhm.
and you mentioned values and everything, but the importance that a leader, that a company should now focus on, and some have already done this and have been doing it for a long time, is to make sure that they have a purposeful mission statement or purposeful values that perhaps align with what employees are looking for in their own life for fulfillment. How important is that to make sure that companies have those ready for employees to align with?
Gosh, man, I'm kind of in the minority on this topic. I
Yeah.
think mission statements and corporate values are mostly, but here's why though. A mission statement and corporate values add tremendous value to the marketplace.
Yeah.
They communicate,
It looks
what we're
good
here
out
to do,
there.
right? It is brilliant. Not even from a marketing perspective. Like if you're not behind the curtains working with us, but you're a client of ours or perhaps considering doing business with us, what do we stand for? What matters to us?
Mm-hmm.
They're aspirational though. They don't, in my experience, and I actually sometimes when I'm on stage, I'll ask the audience, hey, if your organization has corporate values, raise your hand. And of course, nearly everybody's hand
Sure.
goes up.
Yeah.
If you can recite your company's no, if your company has a mission statement, also raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, so values or mission statement, hand up. Now keep your hand up if you can recite them.
Nobody knows them.
And you watch the hands go down. By the way, there is an exception. If I'm at a captive client's office and they all have the same badge, the hands usually stay up,
Okay.
but they're not being honest.
Sure.
But if it's a conference and there's people that are, from various different organizations, different industries, whatever, people are a lot more honest and the
Yeah.
hands come down.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, so if we have values like integrity,
Yeah.
wonderful. We want to be known for integrity, but that does not translate into a behavior behind the curtains. So I think what's important for leaders to do is to define their leadership principles, and that for me that was the 10 W's. That was the
Yeah.
foundation for my book and what changed how I led. And once you define and share those standards with those you lead, and make them hold you as the leader, make them hold you accountable for living those every single day, and they should be obliged to do that because they'll know I'm going to ask and hold them accountable to the exact same standards, no exceptions, never a gap, no leadership gap. But once those are established, we can map them to the values or the mission statement. So, for integrity, for example, the number one we of the 10 We's is we do the right thing always. Now, I just think there's a nuance in there that if I'm considering cutting a corner, or I'm considering, maybe not spending quite the amount of time on something that required a little bit more attention, well, I can always lean back and say, or my boss or a peer of mine can say, hey, man, we do the right thing. And you cut a corner here. That's not who we are. We don't act that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say the same, hey, one of our values is integrity. So you should not have cut that corner. To me, it's not human. It doesn't resonate with somebody. So I think mission statements and values tremendously important. I think they're aspirational, but behind the scenes, leaders and those that we work with should be more focused on behavioral, not aspirational.
You mentioned human, and I want to talk about human connection. I think you mentioned that kind of thing. How some companies, and then maybe it's the day and age we live in, that there seems to be less human connection in companies. And some of that is just the world we're living in, and a digital world that is growing and increasing and making it more convenient for all of us. However, when it comes down to being a leader and dealing with your constituents and your employee base, how paramount is that human connection still to this day?
It's everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything. And before folks before anybody thinks this is heading down a woo-woo path, when I say connection, that doesn't mean we're going for beers.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I air all my dirty laundry to you, or that. What it means is I understand what drives you. I understand what inspires you. I understand why you are here. I understand, and where I want to understand how long or what your goals are in the role that you're in, so I can help you do something more.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it this way, Brian. If as a leader of people, if you approach the way you earn money as a job, it's going to be a job.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll get. You'll get satisfaction that is commensurate with having a job. And that may be tremendous. It may be nothing, but it's going to be a job. But if you approach it as a leader, and by definition, you're leading people. And again, by definition, that means we're going somewhere. Well, where are we going?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean where's the company going? What are we trying to achieve revenue wise or profit? What are we trying to achieve as humans inside this organization that have wants, needs, desires beyond this organization? Our goal inside the organization should be to deliver for the organization while at the same time delivering for ourselves. And that can coexist. It's not always perfect and it's not always harmonious. And there are, we read about layoffs, and I'm not naive to these things. But I do believe if we're focused on the quality of time that we're together while we're together, and are both aligned in what it is that we're trying to accomplish while we're together, I think that human connection I just don't know how you fail when you have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always going to be rainbows and unicorns. And I will tell anyone directly that it does require you to work harder. It does require you to spend more time. It requires you to lean into things that might feel awkward and uncomfortable and unfamiliar. But on the other side of that, man, and this is not my theory, I'm living it. And I know countless others of leaders now that are living it. There's a level of satisfaction and more important fulfillment that comes that dwarfs anything else that you would experience if you just go at it like a job.
Mm-hmm. When you're a leader, or when a leader looks at how they're going to lead, talk a little bit about how it changes a person and their leadership style, or changes them just individually, if they take the time to, and you addressed this a moment ago, if they take the time to really get to know their employees, their people around them, their constituents as people, their likes, their wants, their dreams, where they want to be in life. How does that change a leader when they take the time to consider all of that and the path that they are going to lead these people?
Well, in a number of ways. I think first is fulfillment. I don't know about you, man, but I just think we are all wired in a way that when we see that our efforts, and that could mean caring.
Yeah.
That our efforts have resulted in the betterment or something positive for something or someone else. It's impossible not to feel pride in that. It's impossible not to find some sense of fulfillment in that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and I think I'm not special. It is a multiplier, and it kind of recycles in a way that fuels me to do more of it.
Yeah.
And I think when you're put into a position of leadership, or let's just call it a position of authority. So if you have people that are accountable, to you, when we take the time to understand why each other's in the role that they're in, we're a step ahead of just this transactional thing. So I think it's important to have a bit of self-reflection on what it is that you're trying to accomplish as someone who is responsible for leading other people, and recognize that I do sincerely in my heart believe this, and I haven't always felt this way, that there is an obligation that comes with being a leader that transcends you just checking boxes and giving someone a 2% raise once a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's called management. That's called being a boss. Anybody can do that. But if you want to have true impact, which I think everyone who is accountable, everyone who has people accountable to them, or they're in a position of authority, we should think about our impact. I think it's not just a work obligation. I think it's a human obligation.
I heard you mention the word transactional. Our work is transactional. Talk about what it is for a leader, and really, and maybe even just for an employee, when they approach or get to a point finally in their life and in their career when they can and will look at what they are doing as more than just a transaction, but it's transformational. And that's where they're impacting, they're making a difference. The difference and that shift from transaction to transformation.
Yeah, man, Brian, this is what's so hard for what I do now. Because I am the first to admit that if someone gave me my book in my mid-20s, I wouldn't have read it.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of truth that, with experience comes, if not wisdom, at least insight. I don't know that we're I don't know that we're in a place in the workplace that you have a choice much longer,
Mm.
because as the demographic of people that enter the workplace continues to have this, employees have a voice in the environment in which I operate paradigm. As long as that continues the path that it's on, I think this old school leadership paradigm is a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, there will be exceptions, and there are a lot of organizations that will manage to perpetuate that same leadership approach
Yeah.
just because it's so ingrained in the DNA of that organization. I've been at least one of those companies
Mm-hmm.
that it's just so deep. Nothing I'm espousing is going to change a thing until someone, it's just too deep. So I think as the workplace continues to change, primarily by the demographic and profile of people that are coming in, and I'm not naive, there is let's call it what you want, but my opinion, my experience, not my opinion, my experience tells me there is a greater sense of entitlement with millennials and even younger, which I'm not saying that's right, wrong, good, or bad,
No.
but with that in mind,
Yeah.
we can't lead without understanding a little bit about that and why it is what it is. We
Mm-hmm.
can't turn a blind eye to it. So I think as that shift continues to happen, the older leadership playbook is going to be less and less used, and I think probably with good for better results and better impact and ultimately better connection. That the transactional nature in which I approached my leadership for so many years left me with fewer connections than I am proud to say, especially when I compare it to the number of people that I still have almost monthly one-on-ones with that I haven't worked with in almost a decade.
Wow.
So that type of connection is like, so when you sense the opportunity, if you ever sense the opportunity that you have a bigger calling in terms of not the role that you're in, not a different industry, I'm just saying more of an impact, a calling for more of an impact that you're in, you will recognize what you do is a lot less transactional and more relationship driven, which will, I think, at least in my experience and the people that I work with a lot now, it fuels them to continue to do the same, because it's like this cycle of, you replace lather, rinse, repeat with, wow, that feels good. How do I get more of that?
Uh-huh.
And then
Uh-huh.
that takes its own life.
I want to talk about teamwork and silo. You mentioned that at the very start, I think,
Yeah.
of the show. Um, how is that transformed a little bit in the last few years, or maybe it's become a challenge when we are more working remotely? You seem to be kind of on your own. Pros and cons, challenges of trying to do your own thing or in your own lane as opposed to working as a team.
I think one has a longer shelf life than the other, and I hope it's obvious, but the I'm in my own lane. And I say this as someone who really operated that way the first couple of decades in my career. I wasn't only trying to deliver results, I was trying to impress my boss, and by that I also had to try to look better than my peers. So
Yeah.
it was this, competitive paradigm, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But
No.
someone to win, that does not mean someone else has to lose, actually. In a corporate world,
Mm.
like there's enough shine to go around in my mind. So I think there is a shelf life for that, because ultimately you end up alienating yourself and people won't want to work with you. And gosh, I guess there are scenarios, but I think it's an exception that, really impactful, powerful, excellent products or services are rarely delivered by a single person. And there's, again, there are exceptions, but I would say there's a ceiling to how much value and impact you can really have as one person when there's a team, either down the hall or geographically,
Yeah.
dispersed, but still a team. Boy, it's hard to think that group can't get it right, because they've got, triple or more the brain power, because there's more people. Just the math would tell you there's an opportunity to have greater impact with more people involved. But again, if that is something that is, well, it happens. Obviously, it happens, and I don't blame the lone wolf over on the side. I actually look to the leader to say, well, what are you doing to get this connection?
Mm-hmm.
What do you? And again, I'm not talking about hanging out, going out for beers, or you got to be best buds, but there needs to be a connection to understand the role that I play and the value that I bring to this bigger thing, whether it's part of a team or not. If I'm an individual contributor and I'm not asked to work with a team on a daily basis, that's a different story. But if I am part of a team, then we need to understand what's happening within this team. Who's pulling their weight? Who's not? How do we balance that out? How do we make this an equitable place where the best idea wins? everybody understands the role they play in that best idea and how we win. And I think it's incumbent on the leader to think that way and behave that way.
You mentioned integrity is one of the 10 principles of the book. And again, the book is Begin with We 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. So, without giving away all of them, because we want people to buy that book, outside of integrity, what's one or two that are paramount for a leader to make sure that, and an employee, to make sure that those are present in their work culture atmosphere every day?
Yeah, well, so the connection I made was if someone had or an organization had integrity as one of their values, it needed to be mapped back to one of the 10 WISA principles. And
Gotcha.
the example I used was we do the right thing, which
We do
is
the
the
right thing.
fundamental principle. And I always use that one word second sentence, and it's always, period.
Mm.
We do the right thing, always.
Yeah.
But I would say, man, Brian, two of my favorites and perhaps the most challenging, no pun intended, for folks to grasp and hang on to is we number 8, and that's we challenge each other.
Mm.
And there's also a one-word second sentence behind that one. It's diplomatically, because and there are a couple of rules. Challenges must come in the form or be represented or backed by data or experience. It can't be your opinion, because we all have those, and
Yeah.
that's a never-ending fight.
Yeah.
But challenge historically in most organizations, as you know, it's reserved for the boss.
Mm-hmm.
He or she is the only one that can say, up the game, raise the number, whatever. And I just think the math would tell me that one to many is not as a powerful a recipe as many to many. So when we challenge each other, I mean peers challenge peers diplomatically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean leaders of team are absolutely obliged, and it's not a nice to have. They need to challenge the boss diplomatically, because I believe everything in life, I think it's a fact. Nearly everything in life is accomplished once overcoming one or more challenges, at least anything worth having. I mean, the best relationships with our spouses, of course we have to overcome challenges for
Yeah.
them to be the best relationship, right? So I think any scenario of something that where the product is worth having, we got to overcome challenge, which is why it's important to have we number 9, we embrace challenge.
Mm.
So challenges are going to come, as I mentioned, from everyone, all directions, but there's also market forces. There are external challenges that we may not see coming or that we can't anticipate. And the goal of we number 9 is to not just embrace challenges within and how we offer them diplomatically to one another, but when we're faced with some adversity externally, it's like, let's go. We're going to be galvanized by it.
Yeah.
Because I know the person to my left and the person to my right and the boss that we have in front of us, our leader, is the right person to get us through this. And we won't win them all. We won't win them all, but I'd like to think when we're approaching this as a unified front, we're going to win more than we lose, and we'll learn from those that we lost at.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be better off for them, because we recognize that, again, a challenge is an opportunity for growth. So those are a couple of my favorites. But the challenge in this case is it's hard for many bosses to let go of the ego that is needed to be receptive to the challenge.
Yeah.
And I say that from firsthand experience. As I mentioned, I had to be the right voice. I had to have all the answers. And by definition, I'm not open to challenge. But boy, when you do open, I look at it this way: when you open the door for challenge in a relationship inside the workplace, well, I guess outside as well, it's almost like a dance, Brian. So if I'm leading,
Mm-hmm.
and for those that are watching, if I'm leading and the challenge comes from the other side, I'm stepping back and giving space for that person to bring that challenge. And then we go back and forth. But if we're standing here, I'm not giving this person any creativity, a room for creativity, or the voice or the opportunity to give a voice about a challenge. But when I step back, boy, we've opened the door now to deeper dialogue. Why do we do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a better way? Can we improve the employee experience, or even better, perhaps the customer experience? Without those things, if we're not always kind of trying to up our game, whatever that is, just be sure somebody else is, and ultimately we're subscribing to mediocrity. And nobody wants to be a part of that.
No. I think I have time for one more for you here. But as you step back now that you've been doing this for as long as you've been doing it, what do you think you've learned about yourself as a leader from what you were in the corporate structure to now embracing these 10 principles and applying them to your life and your leadership style and sharing those with others? But how has it changed you and your outlook and just your performance in what you do?
Yeah, Bud, what a great question. And thank you for the chance to answer that, because it's I think at a macro level, if I had to put a bumper sticker on it, I would say everything happens for a reason.
That's
And
great.
that might sound like a weird answer, but I believe every step in my career was the step that was preparing me for the next one.
Yeah.
Every setback in my career, and there were some, um, were preparing me for the next step, whatever that was. And no doubt about it, I didn't recognize it at the time, what some of those setbacks implied or represented on my path. So I do believe everything happens for a reason. It's our responsibility, just like all things in life, is what do we do after the win? Are we satisfied with that, or do we take on more? Do we try to stretch for more? What do we do after the loss? Do we allow it to define us? So with that in mind, with everything happening for a reason, and I say this, and I told you this before you touched record, it's convinced me that what I'm doing now, I'm built for this. And I would have said that, I would have given you that same answer if you didn't have that show name and we were, sitting on an airplane, because everything that has happened for a reason has put me in a position to be able to write a best-selling book, to work with dozens of organizations and hundreds of leaders to help them improve their impact and level of satisfaction. And every step taken to this point has put me in this position, which I think, again, by definition, means I was built for this. And it just fuels me to do more of it, man. So I'm working on the second book now, and I just find so much satisfaction and fulfillment in what I do. I can't see myself doing anything else at this point.
Well, you are built for this, and you're doing some
Thanks,
great
brother.
stuff. And again, the book, if you want to be sure and pick that up, it's the bestseller. It's Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. The author is Kyle McDowell. And Kyle, thank you so much for being on the show, and keep doing what you're doing.
You as well, Brian. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Built for This. Be sure to follow Built for This on your favorite listening platform and share it with a friend. Join me on the next episode when I will share entertaining stories of inspiration, encouragement, and purpose-driven experiences. What are you built for? Built for This is produced and recorded by Heart Media DFW.